Welcome everyone to another episode of Tales of the LGBTQ+. My name is Douglas Parsons. Before introducing you to this week's brilliant guest, I want to give a shout out to Holly, Caitlin, Doug, Sylvia, and our very own Robert Hamilton, who bought us cups of virtual coffee this week. Cups of virtual coffee? Well, Buy Me a Coffee is a website and app where you can lend support to our Tales of the LGBTQ+ podcast. For the price of a real-life coffee, you can help us with the costs that go towards the mixing, editing, and sound of what you are listening to today. This Patreon-type site will help us stay on the air with the quality that we want to be able to give you as we bring you the voices of our community. There's also a way to be able to help support us financially every month. And we can do this through the Buy Me a Coffee site, where at every level, we're able to give things back to you in addition to this podcast that you listen to. So please check out that site, and we'll make sure that we put those links wherever we post this on our social medias. Now, on to today's guest. Needless to say, I adore this man. And I've adored this man for the many years that I've known him. I first met Scott Bryen ages ago when I walked into a local watering hole. Everything stood still. I swear there was a light that was above him, and I moved slow motion towards him as he was decked out head to toe in leather. He had me at hello. But in addition to that figure in leather, it was his eyes, his kind eyes, and it's his presence, where when you're within that presence, you know that you're the only person that he's paying attention to. You feel safe, you feel listened to, and with that, you gain a confidence. But Scott Bryen is more than just that presence. He is a fixture of our LGBTQ community. He has seen the advances that we've taken. He's also seen where we've taken steps back as well. There's a myriad of different topics that we can talk about. But for today's episode, we're going to go back to where I first met him, with leather. And it's interesting to learn about the history of the leather community around the world and in Edmonton, Tom of Finland, and other characters that have been part of our LGBTQ community, especially the gay men's community. So today on Tales of the LGBTQ+, join Scott and I as we explore the leather community and this world. Again, we open ourselves up so much more to understanding when we just take time to listen. That's today on this episode of Tales of the LGBTQ+, and we start right now. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Tales of the LGBTQ+. I'm Douglas Parsons, and I'm thrilled to be talking today to Scott Bryen. How are you today, Scott?
I'm doing well, Doug. How are you?
Considering how cold it is outside, we're surviving.
You're also not outside either.
Oh, amen on that. For everyone listening today, the first time I became aware of Scott Bryen was at a local Edmonton bar, and across the way was this hulking, shirtless man wearing a leather vest, leather chaps, jock, and staring with these piercing eyes that you're noticing right now as well. You had me at before hello, Scott. Good Lord, you're a person with magnetism. Were you always aware that you had this type of factor about yourself?
Actually, no. If I go back into my history, I mean, I was considered the ugly one in the family.
I don't believe it. I don't believe it at all.
Well, it's true. I mean, every one of my siblings has done modeling work, and they are quite, or so I'm told, quite attractive. So
I think that with some of the people watching today are going to be writing their comments, begging to differ.
well, thank you very much for the kindness.
So many people, not only in Edmonton, in the Edmonton area, but around the world, know you as being Sir Scott. For me and others, when I think about the leather community, the image of you immediately comes to mind. To someone listening today to this episode and does not have any awareness of what is the leather scene, what would you describe it as?
Okay, the 50-cent version, and this is my version only because everyone's version of leather is highly individualistic. It is a way of testing your limits, giving yourself permission to do things, understanding that the only limits that you put on yourself are the ones you do put on yourself.
Okay.
And it's really an exercise in trying to get past all of those boundaries. What I say no to today, I may say yes to tomorrow. So it's never a firm no, it is a not now.
Okay. So then what, that's very common because we don't push ourselves past our boundaries, or we settle ourselves into what we think it should be. Is there anything specific that when it comes to leather that pushes a person through that?
Leather in itself is an expression of sexuality.
Okay.
In addition to this sort of mental state that you get yourself into, what you will find as you grow in the leather community is that things like being able to make up your own mind are highly valued, regardless of other people's opinion about you. So in other words, you can lone wolf it if you want. We often refer to ourselves as the sexual outlaws of the community, quite frankly, because a lot of things that we do, and I'm sure a lot of your listeners have got their own sort of mental image of what we do in their heads, does tend to sort of push the boundaries a bit. But I can tell you that everything that happens within the leather community is very consensual. Consensual behavior is insisted upon, and anyone who is not complying with consensual behavior is automatically ostracized. And this has happened to several well-known people in the leather community. So, I mean, like I said, the 50-cent tour, and these, I'm going to preface it with, your mileage may vary. This is my opinion. Yeah. Really is a lifelong exploration of every part of your being, your sexuality, your physicality, your emotional states, and your spiritual states.
So it's not something that you're going to be able to do a 1 hour, 2 hour, 3 hour session and come out of it cured, transformed, all those things.
No, I'm not sure cured would be the right word in this community.
True.
It is something that even after the 40 years I've been in this community, I am still learning things. And I'm still leaving myself open to learn things. And I'm still leaving myself open to learn from new people too. So you don't come in automatically. I'm going to backstep just a bit here. How you introduced me had a lot to do with, number one, the respect that you show me. But you will find that the respect you show me, I reflect in equal and usually greater magnitude to the people that give me respect.
Mm-hmm.
That's another cornerstone of this community.
Okay.
So we have the exploration, we have the respect, not only of others, but of yourself too, and understanding that you're giving yourself permission to do things. In other words, you do not need someone to talk you into something. You need to make up your own mind, like an adult should.
You mentioned just a few minutes ago that you've been in part of the community for 4 years, approximately.
About 40 years.
So how did you enter into the community? Did you have to seek out the community, or did the community come and find you?
Back in those days, and I'm talking the early 80s here, you had to find things for yourself. There was no internet. There was nothing more than the local bars for us to congregate. It was the only safe place we had. So consequently, you would see, much like you described, the occasional leather guy show up. And I don't know about you, but I always found the look very, a number of words come to mind, but attractive is the one I'm going to use.
If you need to swear, go ahead and do that, because we can swear as much as we want on this.
Well, I'm trying to be as polite as possible here.
Sure. Yeah. But it was attractive as fuck.
Yeah, that'll work. Hot will work too. I mean, there's definitely a physical reaction to a man in tight-fitting leather gear. There is just something about that ultra-masculine look, that aura of confidence that comes with it, regardless of who you're looking at on the outside. But then when you get to talk to these people, that you find that they are usually the kindest, most giving, and well-rounded people I have ever met in my life. It is a group that tends to attract people with, this is going to sound bad, but some smarts, some ability to do some introspection, and some ability to do some self-reflection as well, because you are constantly on this journey of discovery. So there are, and I hate to say it, but there are a lot of people that just doesn't appeal to, and that's absolutely fine. Leather is not for everybody. That's the way it was sort of designed, to tell you the truth.
So was it here in Edmonton that you found the leather community, or did you find that elsewhere?
No, actually, I started my journey here in Edmonton. People like Mike Carrillo and Tom Pickard. There's a few other names from back in the annals of history that really sort of guided me into it. I do remember being invited to one of their parties. Okay. Not quite sure what it was about. I was certainly curious to find out. And I showed up in a pair of khaki shorts and a white tee.
Jeez.
I was very new.
Yeah, you were.
You know, the boys were very, very, I'm not having any of this. So before I knew it, I was actually down to my undershorts. Fortunately, I decided not to go commando that day. And they threw me into a rope harness and asked me how it felt. What I remember most from that initial response was the amount of connection and the amount of intimacy that was occurring within that community constantly. And it was something that really appealed to me. Plus the fact, I mean, it was hot as hell. I was starting to make some very good friends. Friendships that have lasted to today, as a matter of fact. So, I mean, these aren't short-term things.
So to ask the question, you said, and like the rope harness, um, a skeptic or somebody who would be listening to that, they'd be like, okay, how can you get a bond from that? How can there be kindness when it's rope and knots? And how, there's definitely trust, but how can there be kindness built into that as well?
No, there's kindness and sensuality. I mean, you can feel a lot from someone's touch. And when your skin is all exposed, you really catch a whole lot of messages that if you're willing to listen, you can hear quite well.
You now have a title as Sir Scott. You can't just enter the community and say, all right, everybody, I'm new to the community. I'm wearing my khaki shorts and a white t-shirt. I'm Sir Scott. Here I am. Can you just claim a title just at the beginning like that?
You certainly can, but most people will laugh at you.
Okay. So it's possible, but.
Oh, I mean, anything is possible. Okay. Whether it's probable or whether it's going to be accepted is another thing entirely.
Yeah, exactly. Now, what are some of the terms that people use? There's the sir. I've heard words like drummer. What are some of the key words that would be used to describe people?
Sir was a title that was conveyed on me by the community that I was serving at the time. Okay. And it really is, I mean, a lot of people can claim a title, but quite frankly, I've never knelt in front of a queen and had her tap me on the shoulders with a sword. So I don't expect this sir thing. As a matter of fact, it still, to a certain extent, makes my skin crawl.
Really? Interesting.
It always has. Sir to me was an honorific given to people who had exceeded and met their community's goals, or they had impressed people to the point where they wanted to show some type of term of respect. And I never felt I did that. I never felt I did enough to do that.
Interesting. And the reason why I say it's interesting, one, because knowing you and knowing your background, I would say to you that, well, it's obvious, Scott. It's obvious that you've given back so much. But even with one of your answers before, you mentioned that you serve the community, or you serve the people within the community. And I love how you said that, but it also goes opposite of what my mind was of a sir, with people serving you. But yet your attitude was that you were of service for the people within your community.
And at the time I was doing this, the leather community was really misunderstood. It was a black box as far as everybody was concerned. Okay. And I was part of the movement that sort of cracked open that box to let people take a look at it. Yeah. So when I talk about serving my community, I'm serving the leather community and educating a larger community about us.
And when you mentioned not just the heterosexual community, but I imagine also teaching the LGBTQ plus community as well. Do you find that there is pushback from the LGBTQ community over the years?
They become both more isolationist and more open arms. But the isolationism comes from people being offended at not being able to keep up with the changing morals of what's happening these days. Mm. It's very easy to demonize people. It is.
Very much so.
And it is very easy to demonize people when you have a social media platform that can reach thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of people. And you can slander people with almost no repercussion on yourself. Mm. So that puts a lot of strength in the people that like to naysay and to destroy and to ignore history and to do things that aggrandize their own egos. So when I say there's pushback from the community, Yes, there is in a certain part of the community, but it is not the entire community. I still have a number of young men that are sort of under my tutelage. I think they just, like to be kind to older guys like me, but that's fine. But they are learning our history firsthand from me. They are picking up my idea of what leather is to me and how I am encouraging them to explore their own limits and boundaries to find out what leather is to them.
Is there a one size fits all for people? That people all have to reach a certain point? Or are there these offshoots where people discover their place that's different from each other?
There was never any type of structure that you're looking for, and everybody seems to think that there is a very structured sort of identity within the leather community. No, there isn't. Everybody's encouraged to express themselves within the concepts of being honorable. In other words, your word is your bond. Mm-hmm. Being respectful, not only of yourself, but of others. And being open and explorative to find out where the next hurdle is for yourself. Those are really the three tenets that we hold solid. But as to how you express yourself within that community, self-expression is exactly what the leather community was all about. It was a bunch of people saying fuck you to the normal rules and saying, no, I want to go this way, and there's a certain amount of mental and physical strength that has to be there before you can make those decisions.
And those three tenets that you were just talking about, those should be in our regular everyday life as it is. And
they should be.
Leather and exploring that side with the sexuality is no different really than when people explore meditation or religion or some of those things where you gather your strength and your identity. It sounds to me that there's really no difference other than how you get there, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, there is no one way.
Yeah.
And that's something that is really stressed within the leather community, is that there is no one way. There is no one right answer. There isn't. There's probably 50 million, depending on the person.
Yeah, which is okay.
Which is unlike a lot of those other things that tend to claim this is the only way.
And no judgment there, and no judgment with how you get there.
You treat people like you want to be treated. You honor your word. In other words, what you say is what you mean. Mm-hmm. And I think you've known me long enough to know that's exactly the way I run my life.
Exactly. Yeah, that's 100% true.
And it gives you a structure to stand outside of yourself occasionally and find something new.
Okay, I like that. I know for myself, when I was growing up, really the only references to the leather community was through music. And so, of course, I'm going to do the typical thing of saying the Village People. Freddie Mercury had some of that look. Frankie Goes to Hollywood with their Relax video.
Right, said Fred.
Yeah, and sometimes at the back of the straight dirty magazines, there'd be an occasional Tom of Finland ad, and unfortunately it was tiny in size, so you couldn't see anything, but it was there. Or there's James Dean with his iconic leather look.
Yep. Or Marlon Brando out of the Wild Ones, or I mean, there's a whole lot of historical references, and those time periods that you're talking about are really just post World War II.
So there was a leather community before World War II?
Oh, there was always, sadists and masochists and BDSM going on. I hardly think that we invented it.
Yeah, that's true. Very true. Very true. So So you were going through and seeing these images at the same time. Um, Going with that, when I saw leather, I instantly always put it towards kink, because of the sexual nature of it. And now, by
Well,
talking to you, hearing the tenets a little bit different. Is there an overlap between leather and kink, or are there clear differences between those two words?
well, there's overlaps between the two. We might do a lot of the same things, but the attitude that we go into it is very different.
Okay.
Heterosexual kink doesn't necessarily subscribe to the idea that everybody who participates in something that you're doing is equally valuable.
Okay.
Tops who are worth more, and there are bottoms who are worth less. Experience is what we actually value more than anything. And I've literally been at leather gatherings where the most senior leather person in the whole room was a big old fucking bottom.
So with something like that at an event, how does one know, that here's the person with the experience, the mental psyche that they've gone through with this journey? In drag queen world, there's like crowns and tiaras, or there's sashes. Is there something like that that tells other people that this is somebody who has respect,
Nope.
or is it a confidence? How do we know?
Nope, you don't know until you talk to people.
Talk to people?
Yes, actually,
What?
physically talk to people. Get to know them. Understand where they come from. Intelligence discourse with them. I mean, it's not rocket science. I mean, really, that's what a leather community is all about, is this idea that communication is something that we really need to practice all the time. And the best communication we can do is face to face, and better yet, in real time, person to person.
Okay. So are you telling me now that if one's going to a leather event, that most of the people are just going to be talking to each other and there's not a spectacle to see, or the
Well, there may be a
debauchery
spectacle to see depending on how the conversations have gone before. I'm just thinking of one of the last leather events I've been to. I think it wasn't even it wasn't a leather event, it was a rubber event, actually.
Okay.
In Vancouver. And yeah, the majority of the weekend conference was people talking to each other, networking, getting to know each other, greeting old friends, blah, 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 blah. There was some education, and there was some time put aside in a very specific spot to express yourself, to play.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't specifically portioned out, but it was encouraged that certain times were for certain things.
So you mentioned the rubber event. What would be the difference between a leather and a rubber event?
Your wardrobe.
Is that what it is?
Basically, it was the wardrobe.
So it's not a completely different community upon itself. It's just,
it can be.
Okay.
Doesn't necessarily have to be. I know there's a lot of people that cross over to multiple communities. For instance, I have fingers into the drag community. I have fingers into the political activist community. I have fingers into the general AIDS and prevention community. I have fingers into a professional community. I mean, we're not just one thing.
Yeah.
None of us are. And if you start to see people as one thing, you are really shortchanging most people, because they are far more complicated than that.
Being associated with the leather community, is it a stigma that you find that you're having to overcome more often than not?
There's nothing I can do to alter someone else's opinion of me. And my father used to say quite wisely, what other people think of you is none of your business.
Yeah.
Basically it. So I really have learned over the years not to concern myself with what other people think of me. What is more important to me is what I think of myself. Am I living up to the standards that I have created for myself? Am I living the life that I chose? Am I living my life to the fullest?
At that time, when you're thinking that, could a person then cause themselves to have their standards be so high that you can never reach those standards? And then just fail in understanding all the great things that a person's done? Is that possible, do you think?
Well, you talk about these things like there is an end goal. There isn't an end goal. The only goal is to live your life and experience what goes on around you. How you choose to express that really is more an expression of who you are as a person rather than what somebody tells you you are.
Interesting. I'm going to be learning more about this leather as we go along, for sure. I have another question that kind of goes a little bit away from this, but every once in a while...
Your interview, you can ask anything you want.
And I will. Don't worry about that. I'm going to ask everything. The hanky code comes up every once in a while. A book comes up or somebody will make reference of it. The hanky code, the colors, the pockets that the hanky went into. Was the hanky code a product of the leather community, or did that come from somewhere else?
No, the hanky code was really part of the leather community and what they introduced into an era where open about your homosexuality was dangerous. You could be evicted from your residence, you could be thrown into jail, you could be institutionalized and forcibly converted, you could be denied medical treatment, that you could be eliminated from your job. There was no recourse for it at all, none. And I don't know whether a lot of your listeners will ever understand the amount of fear that was going on and how much of a lifeline those gay clubs were, because they were the only time that we could actually let down all of the masks of normality that we kept on ourselves to keep ourselves safe outside of those walls.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the upcoming episodes, and I don't know if it's going to air before yours or after, but talking to Ron Byers and about the history of the gay club here in Edmonton with Club 70, then going to Flashback and the Roost, and him talking about just going in and just that relaxing of just the self and going, okay, I'm safe here. And
yeah, I'm safe here and the weight's off my shoulders and I don't have to worry about somebody whispering behind my back and trying to actively submarine you. And that was something that did happen to a lot of friends I know. The consequences were severe. Anyway, we've drifted from your question.
We drift wherever we want to drift, Scott.
Well, I will give you sort of a little history on the background of the hankies. They were actually ways to advertise what you were looking for without saying anything. Like a Sikh who knew that language. Nowadays, it's become sort of a fashion statement.
Yes, of course.
Because the requirement to be that discreet is no longer necessary. But I mean, even if you do go out in public and you have a hanky, it's a good conversation starter sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. Just for people who are listening in and may never have heard of the hanky code, pocket placement was important, left or right. And
yep.
Back pockets?
Back pockets typically. So, for instance, if you were looking at left pocket, then this would be your left. tends to be more active or dominant or aggressive.
Okay.
You had a variety of colors that you could use. And the original colors were nothing more than blue and red. The baby blue was for blowjobs. Dark blue was for fucking. And the red was for fisting.
Okay. Now I know there's some people.
So it was
I'm going to look this up later.
Believe me, I've got an ultimate hanky code here, and I think there is right now pretty close to 150 different colors and materials.
Wow.
So the hanky code has exploded, but I mean, it's become more of a joke than it has a method of survival, which is what it was to begin with.
Yeah, and we have to really emphasize that it was survival. That here we are looking at, oh, it's just a piece of cloth, but it meant a lot. It's not something just to joke at.
Well, it was something that allowed people to connect in a world that wouldn't allow them to connect. And everybody on this planet needs to connect with somebody.
Yeah. Yeah. Amen. Amen. People today are used to seeing drag queens on television with the popularity of RuPaul's Drag Race. And as I mentioned before, titles and tiaras, sashes are part of that dynamic. Within the leather community, from my understanding, that there's titles, there's reigns to be had.
There are titles.
Yeah. So what are some of those titles, and what have you won over the time, and what did that mean?
Well, my first title was the Mr. Drummer contest back in '94.
Okay.
Drummer was the name of a magazine out of San Francisco, and it refers to a John Donne poem. And there's a line from it that goes, if a man does not keep pace with his companions, perhaps it is because he marches to the beat of a different drum. Let him stride to that measure, no matter how far away or distant it is. And that speaks to a lot of leathermen.
So there's a competition. So how, during a competition, do you show that you're walking to a drum of a different beat? Or how does that get displayed?
Well, this particular contest required you to go through an interview process with a panel of judges, usually about 7 of them. Then you were required to do some stage work. One of them would be to enact an erotic fantasy on stage. Secondly, they would ask you to speak for a period of time. And what it all was really in aid of, well, besides the drummer contest, which was really a search for models for the magazine, it was really training people to become ambassadors for the leather community. And it gave you the courage to actually walk out and know that you had both of those things in your pocket.
So when you won that title, is that a moment of you going, yeah, I'm on the right track? Or did you feel like that?
No, it was what the fuck have I done to myself? Back in the 90s, we were really misunderstood. And how I used my title year that year, I was Mr. Alberta Drummer. As a matter of fact, I am the last Mr. Alberta Drummer. The contest closed after I was titled.
They had the best, so they didn't need to go on.
Well, I think at this point, the patch that they gave me for my vest is sitting in the archives somewhere. Calgary Eagle used to have an archive of leather memorabilia, and I'm sure you saw that red patch in the shape of Alberta.
Yep.
That was my patch.
So you were mentioning the misunderstood, and with the leather, I have to bring it back to the 80s and early 90s, that during this time, you know, yeah, we're able to come out a lot more, but our community is being wiped out.
At the same time.
At the same time. And
throwing people back into the closet because the disease becomes another stigma that you have to overcome.
Yeah.
And because you're gay, chances are that you have it.
Yeah.
And nobody knows how you pass it along, so nobody will come near you.
Yeah, exactly. I know for myself, when growing up, it was always negative whenever I saw an image of a gay man, because the only time it was mentioned in the media was when somebody had died of AIDS, like a Rock Hudson, and nobody really knew how it was being passed along. So when my body started to change and go through puberty, when everything started to change, I remember going to my dad and going, "Dad, I have AIDS."
So, I mean, you're talking about a period of time where it was difficult. My husband and I, the worst year we had during those period was 1989. And in Edmonton, which was really a backwater little town at the time, it was probably no more than about 400,000 at that point. I went to 76 memorial services that year, and those were only the people I knew.
Wow. Wow. And because of who AIDS took away, I would imagine almost 100% of those people would have been men.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. And I talked to Ron Byers about this as well. And the difficulty that I'm having now, I'm now at a point where I'm confident with who I am. I've accepted who I am and those type of things. But I sure wish that when I was growing up in the 20s and 30s, that those men were still there, and to get the guidance and to get that mentorship. Because with my friends and all that, jokingly, and every once in a while I get called daddy, and I'm like, I'm 45 years old and I'm just figuring this shit out myself right now.
Get used to it.
Get used to it is true. Or, you know, you mentioned
I've been called daddy since I was 38 years old.
And is that partly because we're looking for that guidance?
It's possibly, I think it is. We really did, through that disease, lose an entire generation plus of wisdom and guidance and people who had been there and done that.
Yeah.
And it left people like myself, because I'm one of the survivors. And believe me, I have no idea how I survived, because I was no better than anybody else. Luck of the draw. And that's all it is. But we had to figure it out on our own. There was no one there to ask, because everybody we wanted to go ask was dead.
So now, again, going back to the late 90s, once the cocktail was found, people started not dying in the numbers that they were before. People started going, okay, we need some things that are more cheerful or more uplifting. And when we go to movies, we don't want to see Philadelphia or Longtime Companion, the gay movies from before. We want to see other things, which is great. But today, in 2021, I'm struck in conversations that I have with people that people don't recognize where our community was and what we've had to go through.
And we're not trying to blow our own horn here. All we did was try to make life better for ourselves and subsequently better for the people coming behind us. Life, I mean, if you really want an idea of how bad it was, talk to my husband, who is 84. He has a generation on me, and there are insights that he has to the general drift of our community that I find quite profound.
Mm.
Back then we had a common enemy, and the common enemy was the disease.
Yeah.
And then the common enemy was the government, who was really denying us a lot of basic human rights.
Mm-hmm.
Those two have been all but sorted out in this country. And without something cohesive for us to all back behind, we tend to drift apart.
Yeah.
And right now, if I take a look at our particular community as a whole, I see a lot of little micro communities, all building their own little fiefdoms and telling other people who can and can't come in. So, I mean, we've got a lot of gatekeepers out there. This is something that we never had back in that time, which is why I have fingers in so many different communities. We were all the same damn community.
Well, and it's important to note that the lesbians in our community were the nurses many times, and the caretakers, and
or they were the front fighters. I would never want to cross a lesbian that had fucking a bee up her bonnet. Wow, you would go down quick. And that was just from me, and I've never been a small man.
no.
But I mean, oh no. No, even I won't cross a lesbian that's mad.
Well, and that's just it. And it's those things that I wish that we were able to still talk about, or it was more known that how close the gays and the lesbians were in the community, just for that entire survival.
And the transgender, and it was all the misfits that were together. I mean, and not to put a finer point on it, if you're gay, you're a misfit. If you're lesbian, you're a misfit. If you're transgendered, you're a misfit. You know, that's why we all hung together, because we actually had a little bit more power at that point. And I have been accused of being a cisgendered white older man.
Mm-hmm.
And it comes up constantly in a lot of conversations that I had privilege that none of the other people that I am talking to had. And I really wanted to tell them without sort of, sitting on the front porch shaking my fist at kids, that we used every bit of privilege that we had to move the dial to where we are now.
Yeah. To stay alive.
I mean, we pushed and pushed and pushed. And a lot of us did. I mean, the Murray Billets of this life, and the Warren Beckers, and the
Michael Fair.
God, there's piles of people that just worked and worked and worked. And yes, a lot of us were white, and yes, a lot of us were male. And yes, we realized that we had a certain amount of power, and we used it for not only our benefit, but our community's benefit. Mm. And we pushed that dial as far as we could.
Well, and to go with that, people have to remember that in Canada, it was only 1998 with the Delwyn Vreen case where we as a community, it was in the laws where it was not allowed for us to be fired from our job.
You know when it really want to know when it was enacted?
Yes.
The decision for Vreen came down in 98.
So when was it enacted?
The enactment by the Alberta government was 2012.
And we had Ralph Klein as the premier at that time, and everybody was telling him to use the notwithstanding clause, and they kept pushing and pulling.
Absolutely. Us back. The one thing that the Delwyn Vreen case actually did for all of us was change the law, not only of this province, but of the entire country.
Which then led into, because a lot of the Delwyn Vreen case, it was used in order to get us our same-sex marriage, our marriage laws. And that was 2005.
Absolutely. And our adoption privileges, and suddenly we're just another part of society. Nobody really cares much. Nobody really should have in the first place. But this type of, and I hate to say it, but this type of history should be taught to everybody in our community, because it's as important as the Stonewall riots.
Absolutely. So for yourself, you've, when it comes to the police, when it comes to the law, it hasn't always been an easy relationship for you when it comes to that type of police force and that.
No, it hasn't. But I mean, I also sat on something called the Sexual Minorities Liaison Committee, which is still running to today. But it is a place for gays, lesbians, transgender, plus, to sit down with the police and talk about things that are going on. And to have some direct influence on the policies that they use to enforce the laws, with specifics to us as a community. I sat on that committee for 2 or 3 years, as a matter of fact.
Do you feel like the people were listening, or do you feel like they were just going through the motions?
No, they actually did. And I will say that at the time we started this, the police were no friends of ours at all.
Exactly.
They certainly were no friends of ours at all. We had to get them to understand we were people rather than deviants or things in their head. And that takes a certain amount of conversation. It always takes conversation.
I hate, because I'm going to be having this conversation with Darren, so I hate to say it because I know this reference because in the chat we were talking, but just to let people know, with the Pisces bathhouse raid, there were approximately 62 people who were arrested that night. They had more police officers out in force than there were actually people who were arrested. So it wasn't just 1 or 2 police officers going in that night. They brought the force, and with
they did, and they destroyed the facility too. They took sledgehammers to everything. So I mean, it was physically intimidating. They marched people out in towels.
Yeah.
You know, there was a lack of dignity that went on. When I look at how the police used to treat us and how they treat us now, that is in no small result from the work that people did behind the scenes. I mean, the work that people did for this community to make it safer for all of us to live, not just me, everybody.
Absolutely.
Did we go far enough? Probably not, but we got old. And I'm sorry, when you get old, you get tired. So you don't fight as much.
And as we mentioned, you know, we lost so many people who were those voices and who were acting up. And, you know, with ACT UP, it's silence equals death. And we lost a lot of those people. And then once the weight of the world falls on the shoulders of a few, it had to been difficult for all those men and women involved in trying to make a difference.
Speaking as one of those people that actually survived that time, we did what we could.
Yeah.
It's as simple as that. We just did what we could.
We're going to get back into leather here in a couple moments, but I do have to ask you, you're a survivor of that era, but now you stand as a witness for what took place then. If you were to talk to somebody who was freshly out of the closet, young, what would you say to him or her?
What would I want them to know?
Yeah.
Oh, there's a number of things I would like them to know. Number one, I would like them to know where we were, to know how far we've come. That'll tell you right there in that journey how much effort has been expended on your behalf to be in this place at this time.
Mm-hmm.
Secondly, that they need to know a few really important names. They need to know the organizers of the Stonewall Riot. They need to know who created the Pride flag, who and what it actually means.
Mm-hmm.
They also need to understand a little bit about our own local history and how much those people have invested their lives into making this person who's just coming out of the closet a little bit safer.
We need to find ways to be able to pass this on. And part of why I want to do this podcast is to make sure that we're recording and making sure that these stories and these people get out as well. So thank you for that. We kind of went off topic a little bit, but I think we needed to go there. So for myself, I've never been part of the leather community, admirer for sure. However, I was able to one night a while ago listen to an excellent discussion about the benefits of communication when it comes to consent, boundaries, community norms. And in preparing me for our talk with each other, it dawned on me that that night of the discussion that I attended may have been the first time I had ever been part of a real conversation regarding that topic of consent. So can you tell me more about this, the communication when it comes to consent, boundaries, and communication norms? Can you tell me a little bit more about that with how the leather community embraces this talk and this part of this communication?
Well, I mean, if you really want to go back to it, there was a number of attempts, usually with an acronym. The first one was the triple S, the safe, sane, and consensual.
Okay.
Don't ask me why it was triple S, because there was a C at the end of it. But
Yep.
so anything we were supposed to do was supposed to be safe, sane, and consensual. Well, that sort of worked for like beginners, but some of the stuff we do isn't particularly sane. Sane people don't, light people on fire.
So we're going to come back to the communication part here, but I know that there's going to be some people here and going, what? Fire? Fire? Wait a minute. Leather? Fire? What? What?
Leather is mostly about sensual expressions. So we deal with all sorts of sensuality. Immobilization or bondage, that is a sensation of its own. It can be physical force. I mean, floggers or paddles, or it can be electricity, which you've seen me use on people before.
Mm-hmm.
And it can be fire, but it needs a really practiced hand to manipulate fire across someone's body without hurting them.
Absolutely.
And there is a sensory pleasure that comes from that that's very hard to explain until you actually experience it.
Imagine. Well, and then it goes back to what you're saying, the triple S for beginners. So then are there more acronyms for the intermediate and advanced?
Well, it was risk-aware consensual kink.
Okay.
So it meant you went into something knowing what the risks were, and you consented to those risks. You knew that they were going to do everything they could to keep you safe, but shit happens. Happens with anything. There was another one, prick, and I can't remember what that one stood for. Something consensual kink.
We live in a society of acronyms. It's hard to keep up these days.
Yeah, but I mean, they tried several of these acronyms to sort of give people guidance to how they should behave. And in every one of those things, the word consent appears. So we spend a lot of time talking about how you get consent. How would you understand that I had given consent for something to happen? Or how would I understand that you had given consent for something to happen?
Mm.
And that's a matter of being able to communicate. And if you don't understand, you ask.
Makes sense.
Not rocket science. I mean, you can come right out and say, I want to do blah, blah, blah. Do you consent? Yes or no. You're there.
Right.
But no, we can spend a whole lot of time talking about something that we want to do. And because of your body language, I can read consent in your actions.
We've been talking, a lot of serious topics and consent and HIV and the building of our community. Do you have a humorous story or something memorable that's happened at one of these events where you just stopped in the middle and just went, how the heck did I get here? Or something just broke the ice?
Yeah, actually, there are several stories.
Are there any that you can actually
the
share?
funny, yeah, this one I could probably share, and he turned into a very dear friend of mine. But the year I was going to compete for IML.
Okay. What's IML?
IML is International Mr. Leather. It's held in Chicago.
Okay.
So I, of course, had not done the leather circuit at all. I mean, I'd done a lot of the Canadian stuff, but I'd never done any of the American stuff. And the closest I could get to doing an American event was to go down to Toronto for Mr. Toronto Leather, MLT. I didn't know what look of leather people would respond to. So the event was over 5 days, and I picked out 5 specific leather looks that I would wear each day and sort of judge how people reacted to me. But I have a problem with my eyes. My eyes will give me away. If I'm to hide that fact, I wore aviator glasses for the whole weekend, so nobody could see my eyes.
Yeah, which is your selling feature.
I don't know about that, but I was sort of liking to think that it was a little bit of talent I may have. So I had literally gone around all weekend. I didn't know a soul there at the time when I went. Certainly knew a lot of people when I was finished. But the first day I just did chaps and a leather jacket over jeans. And the second day I did a leather kilt with a jacket and tall boots. And the third day I did like full formal jodhpurs, the leather tie, the gauntlets, the muir cap, the whole 9 yards, the Tom of Finland look.
Mm-hmm.
And then I did, just a light one, which was like a leather vest and boots and jeans. And then the last day was all Euro leathers, which was skin tight leathers and a very skin tight jacket. So I'd spent these 5 days sort of wandering around and just looking at people, how they reacted to me. So the last day I'm there, the organizer, the head judge of the whole contest comes up to me and says, this is my partner. We're going out to dinner. Would you like to join us? And I thought, sure, why not? No plans. So we sit down at the restaurant, and I've still got the glasses on. And he says, take off the fucking glasses. I know what you're doing. And then proceeded to detail everything I had done through the whole weekend.
Oh, wow.
I was so busted. I didn't realize that people were actually paying that much attention to me, because I never thought I was worth paying that much attention to. It proved to me before, after I started to laugh about it, but what it ended up proving to me is that when you're out in public, people watch. People notice everything.
Yeah.
I mean, I've had I had a boy while we were in Buddies one night at one of the leather nights come up to me, and you know, he had very sort of bashfully introduced himself. He didn't know me, and we just got to talk. And as he sort of relaxed with me, he ended up saying, "I've been watching you for the last 6 months, and I've decided that you are the type of man that I want to be." And he walked off. It was the last thing that I ever heard from him. I hope he's okay, but I can tell you right now, I was flabbergasted. And it again proved to me that people watch.
Yeah. Oh, we should also mention here too, you mentioned the term boy. Now, what is a boy?
Yeah, it really is sort of a generic catch-all term. The young men that are sort of hanging around me trying to, you know, suck what little knowledge I have out, I tend to refer to as my boys. And I've had a variety of boys over the years that still keep in touch with me. And they all sort of learn something different. And I'm wondering, in some ways, it's because some of us in the leather community actually present as a very strong masculine role. And that, I think, in a lot of cases was missing from a lot of young men's lives.
Absolutely.
So, you know, when I get, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a young man. Christ, I've had, you know, men my age refer to themselves as boys because they still feel like they're trying to learn something from someone else, or that's a role that they're comfortable with.
Yeah. I have to do a little bit of thinking about that because, even like I mentioned before, I'm comfortable with where I'm at in my life, but there's always that wonder of what is that role, or does there need to
be? And I mean, it doesn't mean that what you are today is what you're going to be tomorrow.
Oh, and hopefully not. Hopefully not. Yeah, hopefully there's going to be an evolution that goes with that. We've been talking for a while here, and we're coming near to the end of our talk with each other, even though I could talk to you for days on this. While men are seen as the visible people involved within this community, I think for the most part, there are many women involved in this scene, and people might be surprised by that. In fact, Joan Jett, the famous musician, if you take a look at her guitar, you can see a leather pride flag on it. And
absolutely.
People may have experienced dykes on bikes in different parades, things like that. What have your experience been like with the leather women in the community, and how have they helped shape your role within the community itself?
Well, I mean, there's a number of leather women that I've been actually more than fond of, like to the point where I could consider jumping the fence.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, there's been that type of connection. In most cases, I find leather women are actually more grounded and stronger than a lot of men are, to tell you the truth. Men tend to build this persona in front of them and then present that and grow into it. Whereas women just walk out and, you know, like it or lump it, this is what I am, you know.
Yeah. And has Edmonton had significant leather women within the community?
Well, I mean, they've certainly had their share of leather women.
Okay.
I don't know what significant means, to tell you the truth. There's always been a representation of women in the leather community. Gay leather tends to be more male-centric, of course, because it's gay.
Yeah. It is.
Yeah, lesbians, leather. I mean, that's a whole different sort of, that's a different playground.
I like that term, the different playground.
So, I mean, you know, there are different things that they do that I can't, because I just don't have the equipment for it. But there are things that I can do that they can't because I have the equipment and they don't.
Yeah.
And that really doesn't make much difference to any of the people that I've ever talked to. I know one of the women that I did one of my last conferences at, I decided to help her with her presentation, and she was doing a scene on straight razors.
Oh.
And she asked if I would sit and have my head shaved by her.
Okay.
Which is, number one, there's a lot of trust involved in that.
Yeah.
But secondarily, it's a very sensual experience for both the person doing the shaving and the person getting the shave. And her particular kink is she likes to have a blood offering at the end of it.
Okay.
She just likes to make a little cut. And she did 3 little cuts on the side of my head in a way that the blood actually ran from one cut into the next and one cut into the next, and then ran in a thin stream down my face.
Okay.
To tell you the truth, it was one of the most erotic scenes that I'd ever done. And the people who saw the class were actually completely floored that there was such a connection between the two of us while this was happening. Intimate and sexual and sensual and all of the things good play should be.
Wow.
So when it comes to women and men and transgenders and whatever sexuality you want to label yourself as, it really doesn't make much difference in the leather community. It's the connection and the sensuality and the intimacy that make the difference. And that has very little to do with genitalia.
Other than yourself, is there an unsung hero within the Edmonton leather community?
Oh, Mike Carrillo, definitely.
Okay, tell me about him.
He was one of the founders of Northern Chaps, which was the original leather club in Edmonton, ran for 25 years. Tom Pickard came on very early at the onset of the leather community. Both of them did a lot to shape me into the person that I am.
And we're thankful for that. Absolutely.
I mean, but then, you start talking about people who have shaped your journey, and I have to give some credit to people like Jeff Maines, who I've never met, but wrote a book called Urban Aboriginals, which spoke to me so deeply that I still use it these days when someone says, I want to be taught by you. This is what you read first. Tell me how you think about it. Then we've got a place to go for.
Okay.
Guy Baldwin, who I have had the honor of spending some time with. He was actually the one who convinced me into running for IML, to tell you the truth, because I never thought I had it in me. People like Race Bannon and the names are escaping me here. There's a lot of people that I've met over the years that have been some heavy shakers in the North American leather scene. Some of them in the European leather scene. I mean, there really isn't a global scene, although I will leave you with that. But these people are well respected, usually fairly well lettered, and have written a lot of what I consider common sense stuff. I mean, it shouldn't have to be said, but it obviously does if it sells as well as it does. To me, it's all very common sense stuff. Treat people like you want to be treated, and don't limit yourself, and find somebody you can play with that you trust, and that's all of the things that you do normally.
If someone is listening to this episode and they're wanting to learn more or to seek out advice, what advice do you have for them? Whether it's, you've mentioned the book, are there websites? Are there groups here in Edmonton that they can reach out to? Alberta, Canada-wide?
There really isn't much of a leather scene in Western Canada right now. The majority of the leather scene has either gone underground or we got old, you know. And really, who wants to see an old guy wandering around in leathers these days? I mean, they just sort of get, well, no, a lot of people get creeped out by it, Doug. You know it as well as I do.
Well, they're just wrong. They're just wrong.
Well, they have an opinion, and it is certainly one that gets heard.
Mm.
Let me think about some of the resources that I can pull up, and I probably fire you some things.
Yeah, and that'd be good.
There certainly is still a lot of community floating around. I will give a quick plug to my own event, which has been running for 17 years now, and that is Kink Kamp. It is a weekend Leatherman's retreat once a year in around the Caroline area now. And it really is just something that sort of builds a leather brotherhood community regardless of sexuality, but it is really restricted to men because there is a certain viewpoint that men have when they're all together, and a certain viewpoint that women have when they're all together, and a certain viewpoint that everybody has when they're all mixed together, and they aren't necessarily the same viewpoint.
Mm-hmm. And so this is these are workshops and things like a leather convention that we're talking about.
Yep. But more of a focused one. It is actually a retreat. We all eat together. We all sleep in the same facility. It's a family building exercise, is what it is.
So how do,
because a lot of leather folk I do consider as closer than my own family.
Yeah, chosen family is so close. Absolutely. Where do people find out information about Kink Kamp?
There is a website. It hasn't been updated because of the COVID nonsense, but it does give you some basic information on the camp. It's www.kinkkamp.ca.
Perfect. And we'll make sure that wherever we post this podcast, whether it's on YouTube or otherwise, I'll make sure that all the links and these resources are listed there as well, because we need to make sure that this information gets out there.
Wonderful, Doug.
Yeah, Scott, I could talk to you for hours about lots of things. And at some point in the future, we have to get more into your story that's outside of leather. I am more than wanting people to know your history of being here in Canada and you meeting your husband and this generation difference, but your husband's done some cool stuff here as well. So
yeah, he certainly has.
Yeah, so I might have a couples episode coming on here with both.
Only if you want to see us fight online.
Done. Done. All of a sudden, Tales of the LGBTQ plus turns into a Jerry Springer show. I'm all
exactly. You can see it happening.
I love it. Well, Scott, thank you very much for being my guest today here on Tales of the LGBTQ plus. I've learned a lot. I thought I knew a lot, but just skimming the surface. So thank you. And to everyone listening, on behalf of Scott, thank you for tuning in and listening to this episode of the podcast, Tales of the LGBTQ+. Until next time, I'm Douglas Parsons telling you to be good and please remember to text when you get home. Bye for now.